Hi, I'm Shamus, and I'm a recovering addict, and this is my story on Inside Addiction.
Shamus, welcome to the show.
Thanks,
I'm so
man.
glad you can make it today.
Absolutely glad to be
I was
here.
thinking on my way here to the studio, I'm not really quite sure when we started talking, but I remember it was a mutual acquaintance of ours
Yep.
who contacted me and said, hey, you have to meet this person, Shamus.
Yep.
And they told you some of the things that I was involved in, and they briefed me on some of the experiences that you've had.
Right.
And then we were texting back and forth. We talked on the phone, and then we met for dinner over at my place on Delaware Avenue. We had some wings, and I have to tell you, even at that point, I found myself, guilty of looking for someone totally different than what walked in the door that day at that restaurant. I did not expect to meet someone like you, someone that looked like you, because I heard the backstory. Hey, he was addicted to prescription drugs, heroin. When you walked in the door and you're like, are you Dean? And I'm like, this cannot be Shamus.
Yeah, I felt the same way, kind of. I mean, and that's just like, a part of, like, I feel like the addiction, like, it's like, you expect it, a lot of people, expect that it's going to be a certain type of person, whatever, but it's, it can affect anybody, really, and but we all share like a common thing. Once we sat down, though, it was like we've been friends.
It was like we knew each other forever,
exactly.
And this is, another great opportunity to break down the barriers and the stigma of what a recovering addict looks like.
Yeah.
So I know what played into the parts and what led up to your addiction. Everybody else doesn't. But let's start with how it was growing up. Give me a little backstory on, how it was growing up, where you grew up, you have brothers and sisters, how it was in school.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in this area. I grew up in Clifton Park. My dad had two kids from a previous marriage who would visit us on the weekends. And I have a younger sister who's 2 years younger than me as well. We were pretty normal in our suburban family, well-to-do. My dad ran a pretty medium-sized business based in Albany. And life was pretty good for a while, like when I was a young kid. But eventually my parents started fighting a lot. They got divorced or separated and got back together a few times between maybe when I was, in first or second grade up to about ninth grade, where they eventually, got divorced and went their separate ways. I think that, I don't know at the time I acknowledged it, but it definitely played into a big factor in my life, and using drugs and alcohol to hide a lot of the pains that I wasn't really wanting to face myself and stuff. But we had by all accounts, I had a great childhood, except for the fact that the turmoil within the parents thing, which I think, like I said, not at the time, but I tried to hide it. But down the road, I think it definitely impacted my use and my susceptibility to getting doing more.
So tell me about, for example, school when you were a kid.
Yeah, I was never really great at school, but I was never bad. I was an A, B student. My parents would, honestly, I kind of was pretty spoiled with a lot of things. Like we had a ski house up in Vermont. I remember I think maybe it was second grade. My parents took me out of school for a month in February so I could ski all winter. So
nice.
I always had, like a lot of opportunities and a lot of things that were not really typical of your average kid, but I thought it was, pretty average. And that's kind of, I think that also led me in, later stages kind of to feeling like I had a sense of entitlement and being able to get away with more things than maybe I should have been able to. I was always into sports and stuff. I was always, a great athlete, even from a young age. My older brother was a great athlete as well. So that was always, my main focus in school. Really was throwing the football on the playground more so than studying. And that's pretty much been the story of my school ever since.
Did you go to public school, private school?
Yeah, I went to public school until sixth grade. I went to Shenandoah, and then my parents. I'm not sure why, really. I still don't really understand the reasoning, but they decided that maybe private school education would be better for me. So I went kicking and screaming to a private school in Albany, and I was nervous, and I had a lot of friends at public school, and I didn't really see why I needed to be making this change. But eventually, I fit right in there once I got there, and it was a very looking back, it was a strange circumstance. I don't know how it I don't know if it really necessarily benefited me to switch to a private school, just because of who like myself as like my personality. It was like a very wealthy, affluent group of kids who, like myself, felt maybe a sense of entitlement. And as we got older and started, drugs and alcohol started coming into the picture, I think public school has the same thing. They got all the same problems, but I feel like they maybe were amplified by a sense of entitlement.
Sure, and you don't hear that a lot about the private schools. The public schools, it's more public with their issues. So private school, what grade did you go to a private school?
7th grade was my first one.
So 7th grade, you're going to a private school, upper class, shirt and tie every day, uniform?
Yeah, it was all, from K through 12 was all in one building. Then they had, middle school was 5th through 8th, I believe. So I was in pretty much the second half of the middle school when I was there. So we were kind of the big little guys on campus almost there. But we were always seeing the older guys running around the school, and we quickly, you could see the guys who were, the cool kids and who were partying and stuff like that. They were in the halls every day, even from 7th, even from kindergarten really, but from when I was in there in 7th grade. So, you get to see like, eventually they become like when we, started getting interested in, going and partying, girls and stuff like that, you kind of had like, oh, these are the kids who I want to be hanging out with and stuff. So I think that also probably contributed to, picking up drinking and...
So you picked up drinking, and what age was that when you were first kind of introduced to and first experimented with alcohol and drugs?
Well, the first time I ever really drank was with my older brother, my half-brother, who's about 7 years older than me. He played lacrosse, I played lacrosse. We were going down to the college lacrosse Final Four tournament, which is, he'd been going with my dad for years, and this was the first time I was able to go. I think I was in 5th grade. And he had brought a bunch of his friends down. My dad got him a hotel room, and of course I wanted to hang out with my big brother and stuff. And they were just about to graduate high school at this time, so they were all hitting the booze pretty hard then. And I had like a sip of beer because I just wanted to be like them then. But from that point on, like I felt like I always wanted to be hanging out with the older crowd, almost just because I thought that was the cool thing to do, even though I was pretty young at the time. And I didn't get drunk that time, but from that point on, maybe 6th, 7th grade, I didn't consistently drink, but when the opportunities arose, we'd dip into my parents' liquor cabinet when they were gone, and that just kind of escalated over the next couple of years. And
next couple of years into smoking weed?
Yeah, and then once I got to academy, the weed was a little bit more of a thing. I'd never really had seen. I'd heard about it, but
you'd heard about it in public school, but you were actually introduced to it in the private school.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and they had a military component to the school at the time. They don't have it anymore. But first time I smoked was we had a big end of year like parade, pretty much, and each little company would do their thing, and they would go back and wait for all the rest of them to be done. So we did our thing. Our company was like favored to win. So
was this a military prep school?
Yeah. Okay. Yep. And then during that, my captain of my military, my company, said, "Let's get in the car, let's go." During the parade, me and his lieutenant and one other kid from our company drove around for 5 minutes and smoked a bowl before we had to go back out for the final closing parade or whatever. And I think we ended up coming in second during the whole thing too. But I look back and I laugh, thinking that was like, it was such a not really the opportune time to be, experimenting with that, but that was kind of just the culture. It was like, you could get away with things, and it was kind of like, how much could you push the envelope there and stuff.
So how old were you at that point?
That was in 9th grade.
Okay, so 9th grade. How did things continue? The grades are still good, A's and B's when you were going to private school?
Yeah. I struggled with math and science. I always did. I just didn't really care about it, honestly. Like I said, I always been more focused on sports and stuff, and I never really put much value on academics, really, which I do regret that I didn't really value that as much. But yeah, then the parade thing was at the end of the school year, so a couple weeks later, I was hanging out at my friend's house over the summer. And
in between 9th and 10th grade?
Yeah, the summer, like after 9th grade. My friend had an older sister who was a big pothead, and she thought it'd be cool to get all her little brother and her friends stoned, so we ended up, that's when I started picking up over that summer quite a bit, And then it was sporadic for a couple of years then.
So did it just stay with alcohol and weed, like 9th, 10th, 11th grade?
Yeah, up till about 10th or 11th grade, I experimented with cocaine about in 11th grade, like at our prom. They call it the officers' ball, and that was the first time I did that. And a lot of people that started to become a culture as I hit about 10th, 11th grade at our school. We would it started showing up at parties all the time all of a sudden, where it wasn't before, whereas it was just drinking, before, or at least as far as I was concerned.
Yeah.
So that kind of took over the parties for, not took over, but it was more prevalent it seemed like all of a sudden everyone was doing it at the parties, and I don't know if that's a result of private school. I don't think necessarily, but
we were doing it in public school too, Shamus.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So it's like but yeah. I mean, people. We would have these parties at these rich people's houses, and
Yeah.
it was just what you might see out of a movie. But I mean, that happens at both places. But,
Sure.
So yeah, that was really it. I never really got in trouble really too much for it though, but I didn't really do much with school really, and then it was time to go to college. I didn't really focus too much on my applications or anything. I ended up going to community college for a year and got into like one of the only schools that I could, and just went there just because it was the easy way out. And
So how was college? Your use continue after graduating from high school to college?
yeah, it did. It was more of the same really, maybe a little more intense.
So it kind of stayed fairly consistent.
Yeah. Up to that point, I'd done I'd taken a couple hydrocodones and stuff here and there from like my dad or whatever when I could find them. But honestly, they always had made me feel sick to my stomach, so I never was really too, keen on them. But I know some people were definitely into them a lot. But I was always having fun playing beer pong and smoking weed and stuff like that. And that pretty much continued all throughout college until maybe my sophomore year. Summer after my sophomore year, one of my friends, he had gone away to college in Arizona for the summer, and he came back, and somehow he was getting a ton of these, the oxycodone, the 30 milligram oxycodones, and that summer it seemed like all my friends I think maybe because they were around, that became the thing to do. Mm-hmm. And that started off slowly too. Like I said, when we were talking before, I started out, just buying one of them, and they're expensive. They're $30 a pill. I mean, I had a low tolerance, so I only really needed, one or two of them. And so I just slowly started getting sucked into that, and before I knew it, it became doing one or two every day.
How long did that process take from doing one to doing one a day to doing two a day?
A month or two, maybe at most. It was pretty quick onset, honestly. Once, like I said before, they had made me sick. Like when I had taken the hydrocodones before. Once I got used to that, and they weren't making me feel sick anymore. They were making me feel great.
Yeah.
I was like, this is awesome. Like, I'd always been a pretty heavy weed smoker, and I was always like, oh, weed's great. It's harmless, whatever. Once I got into the painkillers more, I pretty much forsook weed because I was taking money away from me being able to get these pills more, and they pretty much became the central focus of my day-to-day activities. Like I didn't really want to start my day or end my day without being able to know that I was going to get one or two at least, or whatever I could afford.
Yeah.
And then I was dating a girl at that time over that summer. We broke up maybe around Thanksgiving or so, and I started using a lot heavier after that. I don't know if I just used that as an excuse to ramp up my drug use, but for the whole winter there, I was a little maybe I was depressed a little bit, but I used a bunch. My parents could tell that something was going on with me, and eventually I just came clean to my dad because I was taking money from him. And I had to say something, I had to get out of the situation, diffuse it. So I said, I've been doing painkillers. I need to get this straightened out. I think I need to go to rehab, but I don't want to go to just any rehab, So
How old were you then?
I was probably 24. Mm-hmm. So I took 5-6 years to get through college. So I took my time on that. So I didn't really try too hard on the studies. But so I said, I need to go to rehab, but I don't want to go to a dungeon where I'm going to be trapped all day. I wanted this to be a comfortable experience for me. So I made sure.
I want to take a vacation.
Right, exactly, pretty much. So the kid who actually I had started getting them from that a couple summers before, who lived in Arizona, had gone to a rehab out there.
Oh, so he gave you a referral.
He gave me a referral to a beautiful
That's
rehab.
a nice drug dealer.
Very good, yeah. He was like, this place worked great for me, So.
Oh my!
And he's pretty.
But if you change your mind, I got you covered.
Yeah, I moved in with him after I got out of rehab. So yeah, I mean, it was just
I got something for you.
It was just a typical, typical I say, but just a beautiful situation for an addict, like for someone who didn't really want to get clean, but wanted to look like they were getting clean, So
you go to rehab. Where'd you go to rehab?
It was a place called Sundance out in Arizona.
Okay.
It was $30,000 for a month.
Nice.
A putting green, jacuzzi, had a nice double queen size bed maybe with one other guy, or private bathroom, in pretty much a mansion in the middle of the desert in Arizona. So I got there and I thought, man, this isn't so bad. I can do this for a month.
My dealer was right.
Yeah, he lived down the road at had his house down there. So he would come and visit me there and hang out. He wouldn't bring me any pills in the rehab or anything, but he could have. But
it was nice of him to show up on visiting.
Yeah, exactly. He show up on Saturday and give me a little moral support or whatever in his M5. Actually, when I was there for a little bit, they would take us out to go to AA meetings in the Phoenix Valley region, and I did start feeling like, maybe this is the right place.
Yeah,
maybe
you got some exposure to sober support.
Yeah, and Arizona has a really vast recovery community.
Yeah.
There's meetings all over the place every day. So, I was thinking, and I don't know how serious I was looking back, but I definitely was like, this is kind of a cool thing these people have going.
The seeds were planted at that point.
Right. But my will and my resolve and my desire was still, my addiction was still, working its magic.
So you completed that program.
I did, yeah.
Okay. You come back to New York?
No, at the end of the program, I had this great idea that, maybe New York is part of the problem, and I should stay out here in Arizona with where my drug dealer lived. Where he went to Arizona State, and he had ended up living out there. So I was like, hey, maybe I can move in with you for a couple months, try to find a job out here. I'd be close to the rehab center because they had meetings you could go to on Friday nights. I had made some friends in the rehab center who were local.
Was he still dealing?
No, he wasn't dealing. He claimed he was fighting his own battle with trying to get sober, but he was having some struggles too. On the day that I actually graduated from that rehab, he was at the ceremony. He ended up coming up to me afterwards and said, I've been using, I'm going to actually go back in. But he's like, you're still welcome to come in and live in my house.
I'll watch the house for the next month.
Yeah. So he stayed at the rehab for about 2 weeks after I left. I went back to New York for a couple of days to get all my stuff and move back. So I lived at his house while he was now in the rehab for maybe 2 weeks, I think.
Yeah.
And I started using, I actually never used with him when I was out there the entire time. We were probably both using at the same time, but we were both keeping it separate. Yeah. But I had made a friend from Arizona who lived in Phoenix and was hanging out with me. And eventually one day we were just like, I'm bored, just the boredomness kicked in. I was living at his house, had a pool, it was beautiful, and there was tons of things to do.
How long out of rehab did you find yourself bored and
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Using again?
Yeah, I was going to meetings when I was out there, but one day we were just hanging out by the pool at the kid's house, and we were both just like, oh, I'm bored. It was kind of like we were insinuating that we wanted to maybe try to go get some, and eventually one of us said well, we want to maybe go get a couple. And after that, it was pretty much just off to the races again. They were cheaper out there than I'd been used to, so I was buying even more of them. So that was I went to the rehab in June, moved out there in July. Did them pretty heavily from that point, from July to maybe mid-August, where I started to run out of the funds that I had saved up and my parents had given me to move out there. I hadn't found a job yet, I wasn't really trying to. So I started to panic and I was like, I need to get out of this situation. So packed up my bags, moved back to Albany, moved back in with my dad, and pretty much right away from that point, from maybe a week after that, I started hanging out with my same old friends and picked up. They knew that I had gone to rehab, but I was like, oh, I'm all right. They were going to go get some one day, and I was like, give me one or whatever. And then it just started right where I left off and came right back around.
So did it progress to anything further beyond the oxys?
Yeah, eventually it did.
And how'd that happen?
It was just, I mean, I think it was, I don't know if it was inevitable, but the money that oxys cost and were just
Gets expensive.
very, especially when you start developing a tolerance for it, and not only tolerance, but I guess your addiction just starts going rampant for them. And where one was good, you could cut it you could cut the pill in half and do one half, in the morning, and then do one at night. Eventually, you're taking 3 or 4 of them in a day. I was buying 10, 12 a day if I could. I ran out of money eventually. Started stealing from my parents again. I graduated to heroin maybe in June of the next year, so I was home for about 9 months. One day I was trying to get pills all day, couldn't find any, and I knew the withdrawals were coming, which I had now been pretty familiar with whenever I hadn't been able to get them. So my dealer, I had a new dealer now who he was a shady character. Usually was meeting him in some pretty sketchy places, and I knew that he did heroin. I could just tell. So one day he kind of brought it up, like, I'm going to go get some bags or whatever, and I was like, well, I could either get some of these or start suffering. So
and looking back, the kid that was at the parade driving around for 5 minutes, smoking weed, drinking, doing coke, never thought once,
exactly,
I'm going to become a heroin addict.
Never. I mean, I always was like, I was the type of person who was definitely ready to experiment with drugs, but I always told myself, I'll never stick a needle in my arm, that's for sure. I can draw the line whenever I need to or whatever, but that clearly wasn't the case. I just, first time I did heroin, I was in a car at about midnight, and he was like, just sniff a little bit of it, and miraculously it did the same thing as the pills did. It gave me the same exact feeling for a third of the price.
How long did it take from sniffing powder heroin to shooting it?
Not long, couple days.
Couple days.
Yeah.
So you went from doing oxys, not having oxys available, to sniffing heroin, to shooting heroin within a week? Yeah,
I would say within a week. It was, I bought a couple bags that first night and did them, said, hey, this is a lot cheaper, why don't I just keep doing this for a bit? The kid who I was, my dealer, he would, shoot up in front of me a little bit while I would sniff one. One day I went home after meeting up with him and was like, wonder what that's like. So I tied a belt around my arm, called him, was like, how do I do this? He kind of gave me a little walkthrough over the phone of how
instructional.
How to shoot, how to stick a needle in.
Yet another,
really safe.
Yet another savory drug dealer.
Right, this guy steered me in all the right directions. So I did it on my own the first time. I think I messed it up pretty bad. I could see like a bubble underneath my skin, but next time I met up with him, I just looked away and had him do it, and had him show me how to do it. And then for the next month and a half or so, I spent every dime I could find on getting bags of heroin. I was working at a time, I had a pretty decent job, was living at my mom's house, was taking money from her. Eventually I was like, maybe I need to go out on my own. I need to have my own apartment and, have some responsibility, and then I'll knock off this childish behavior or whatever. But that just turned out to be, I got an apartment, and that just turned into a drug house there with me and whichever dealers I would let sleep on the couch, and they would give me bags or whatever. So that carried on for maybe a month and a half or so, and things just spiraled out of control. It was just, didn't really have anywhere to turn to. And I went down to Twin County Recovery, and they said, do you have any insurance? I was like, no, I don't. So they were like, well, go to the Department of Social Services. And so the next day I went there, shot up in the morning before I went there, waited in line and talked to a social worker and told her, I'm pretty much down and out. I think I need to get help. And she was like, okay, go file for unemployment, come back in 10 minutes, and I'll see what I can do for you. So I went to the library, filled out the unemployment, and when I came back, she had a temporary Medicaid thing all set up for me. I called Twin Counties up. They were like, do you want to go to Conifer Park? It's like, I had no other options, but I said, yep. They were like, do you want to go today or tomorrow? I was like, I want to have one last hurrah, so I was like, I'll go tomorrow. And that turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me, really.
And how old were you when you went to Conifer?
This was in 2012, so I was 25. So, and I think the difference was that time was I got there, not Not necessarily because I totally wanted to, or I was totally convinced that like I, was ever going to be able to recover.
Yeah.
But I had no other options. But I did it myself. I didn't, tell my parents I want to go to this fancy rehab and
Yeah.
pay this money. I had to go to the social services and do all, and
You have to
jump
do
through all
some
these
work.
hoops. Yeah.
It wasn't get on a plane, go to Arizona,
Right.
enjoy the hot tub and the putting greens.
Exactly. And when I got to Conifer, it was definitely a far cry from the putting greens and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And for a while, I was still convinced that I was pretty hopeless, I guess. I was like, I'm never going to be able to stop, doing drugs on some level. And then maybe 2 weeks into it or 3 weeks into it, after going to the group sessions, I had like, I guess, an epiphany. It was just like, these people are all telling us, you got to, go to 90 meetings in 90 days.
Yeah.
Get a sponsor. Listen to what these people have to say. And part of me, something just said like, maybe I just need to listen to those people and stop trying to figure it out my way. And that's what I did. And I got out of there.
And that was 2012.
Yep.
And you've been sober since 2012.
Yep.
We got a couple minutes left, and there's just one thing that two things I want you to share on.
Yeah.
One thing I'll kind of share. Also in 2012, to the extent of where prescription addiction to opiates takes you.
Yeah.
You at one point found yourself in a parking lot of Walgreens in Saratoga.
Yeah.
Forgot to mention that.
Yeah.
With a note in your pocket, and you were about to go in and rob the pharmacy.
Yeah. That's where it was. I mean, that's where it led me down a path like where I thought that was a rational way of being able to get to deal with the problem that I couldn't find any, or I didn't have any money. Hey, like I was, I did some research on Google News, like, I was seeing all these, these articles about people getting away with this all the time, and thought I could get away with this too. So one day I was really desperate. I formulated a plan, put on some mesh shorts, khaki shorts, a polo shirt, undershirt underneath it, parked my car across the street from this place. I get out of the car and the button on my shorts pops off. I'm like, man, but I still keep walking towards the pharmacy, holding my pants up.
I'm going to rob a pharmacy, pulling my shorts off.
So I'm like, I get to I cross literally into the parking lot, and I'm like, I'm not going to be able to run fast enough back to my car to get away with this. So by some divine intervention,
the grace of God,
I turned around, and that was about a month before I went into rehab.
And your mom still has that note?
My mom still has a note in her jewelry box.
When you were going to rob the pharmacy?
Yeah, I had a note saying, give me the oxys and don't talk to anyone. Just give me them, and I was just going to take them and go and run, but my pants were going to fall off. So
last few seconds, Shamus, this is your camera right here. What message would you give to somebody, be they somebody in a private school, has been afforded the opportunity of a great upbringing? You went to Shenandoah, lived in Clifton Park, ended up going to a private school, still found yourself in the grips of addiction, but also found yourself as a young person in recovery. What advice would you give to someone that's still sick and suffering?
Don't be afraid to ask for help, and don't be ashamed of who you are. Addiction is a disease just like anything else, and there's ways out of it, and there's ways that you can help yourself and live a far better life than you will probably ever could imagine at the time. I know I couldn't.
Shamus, thank you.
Thank you, Dean.